We have two types of foam pads. One is the black bar foam pad that wraps around the bar, and the second one that we'll show you after is the blue foam pad that goes underneath the bar but on top of your hips. Now, you don't need to use these. I've had a few clients that don't like to use it, but I find once it gets heavier, the bar tends to put a lot of pressure on your hip bones, and it's more comfortable to just use the pads. When it comes to performing hip thrusts, there are actually a few different ways that you can do the exercise. The first way that I'm demonstrating here is called the scoop method, where I'm posteriorly tilting my pelvis and the whole movement is initiated from the glutes and just trying to completely extend my hips all the way up. The second variation is moving my full body to get hip extension. Now, don't get me wrong, this still targets the glutes as the main working muscle group, but you may also feel a little bit more hamstrings or quads working at the same time. The second variation is performed with a neutral spine position compared to the posterior pelvic tilt position of the first scoop method. Now, there's not a huge difference between the two. They both target the glutes as the main muscle group being worked. However, they just focus on different ways of doing it, and we know that variation is one of the keys to constant progression. This next variation is doing a hip thrust with the barbell on a bench that is in the decline position. Now, the difference with this is that it's usually a lot more comfortable. Now, this is because a regular bench height might be a little too high for people, and having the edge of the bench can actually be uncomfortable on some people's upper backs. Now, this variation is actually my personal favorite, and that's because you still get a full range of motion, but the upper back and mid back area is a little more comfortable when you're in that decline position. Taller people probably don't have that much of an issue on a regular flat bench, but shorter people will. And now I'm going to show you how to set up a hip thrust with the barbell using the blue foam pad. The foam pad is a rectangular design. I find it much more effective using it in the longer orientation so that it covers more of my body and keeps the bar tucked in the groove a bit better. I notice with some people that use it sideways, it looks uncomfortable and there's less room for error because the bar wants to move off of the pad and onto your body if you don't have it tucked in place properly. This version is using a hip thrust specific bench. I'm sure you can do other exercises with this thing, maybe some Bulgarian split squats or something like that. But essentially the main exercise is to do hip thrusts on this type of bench. Now, what you want to pay attention to is that we don't actually want the pad moving a whole lot. The purpose is not to make it move as much as it can. The pad on the bench moves to make it more comfortable for you. Remember the example that I gave earlier on with the flat bench, that sometimes the edge can be irritating on your upper back. So this prevents that from happening. I also find that if you purposely move the bench through its full range of motion, you end up feeling less of your glutes and more of a balance between your glutes, hamstrings, and quads when compared to doing the version where you're not moving the bench through the full range. Another thing that we like to do when it gets heavier is to stabilize the back of the bench by putting a dumbbell or two behind it. I personally prefer just putting one dumbbell because we don't want you pushing back too much. We want you pushing up and down vertically instead of horizontally. So by putting one dumbbell there, you get a little bit of stability, but if you push too hard, the bench still may move. Okay, and this is doing a hip thrust using the bench and a dumbbell on your hips. So this is one way to set up by putting the dumbbell on your hips and sitting down. Now I'm just going to quickly show you that you can also use other implements instead of dumbbells to help stabilize the back here. And now the way you can pick it up from the ground is by using both hands, and you don't want to pull the weight up with your lower back.
you want to get close to the dumbbell and use your full body to anchor and pull the dumbbell onto your hips. This is especially important as it gets heavier. You might be doing a heavy dumbbell that you can't curl with one arm, therefore you want to use your full body to get it up. So once again, we're starting here with the scoop method, and you'll see that the bench barely moves, but it moves a little bit, which makes it comfortable because I'm not digging anything into my upper back. Once again, the point is not to make the bench move as much as it can. So now this is doing a regular neutral spine hip thrust, and you'll notice that the bench does move more. That's because the hamstrings and the quads are also working, and it's kind of pushing back a little bit. I find with this hip thrust bench, you're better off doing the scoop method and letting it naturally move just a little bit to make it more comfortable for you. The purpose is not to push it all the way back. There you go, everyone. Those are a few of the main hip thrust variations that we use. We'll use a bench or a decline bench or the specific hip thrust bench. And in terms of loading this exercise, we like to use dumbbells, barbell with weight plates, resistance bands, and you can even put chains over top as well.